So we are joined once again by David Alzofon, who has been an inspirational part of the APEC conference. He has been with us since the beginning of this conference. He's presented on his father's work a couple of times. This is something that Mark Sokol, this is incredibly close to Mark's heart. He's been working on the Alzofon flying saucer. So today, David is going to describe how to build a flying saucer based on the theoretical and engineering work of his father, Frederick Alzofon, combined with an analysis of UFO field emissions and various things that kind of go along with that. The Alzofon method for gravity control is documented in the book Gravity Control with Present Technology, written by David Frederick, and it utilizes a method of applying microwaves to align particle spins and create propulsion from kind of a gyroscopic precession effect on the atomic level. Okay, so David, I will ask you to unmute once again, sir.
Okay, can you hear me?
Perfect, perfect.
Sure.
And yeah, go ahead, sir, and feel free to share your screen or whatever. I will mute myself out, and thank you again.
Okay. So can everybody see me? Am I visible? Okay, good. Yeah, the last time I was here I was just coming down with COVID, and at the time I just had a runny nose. I'm feeling really good today, by contrast. And it's been, let's see, I think it was December of 2021 that I got COVID and spent a year recovering, and now we're into 2022. And in the meantime, Mark has been working on his experiments, and I know that Mark had some initial success, and I was really encouraged by that. I'd like to back up though and explain how my father's theory came about, and try to give everybody a 5-minute lecture on the theory behind it and why that theory should be interesting, at least as interesting as all the other theories out there. And that has to do with his use of the scientific method. Now, my dad was, well, he died in 2012. And at that time, by that time, I had been spending roughly 42 years trying to get money to back his research. And his writing about gravity, though, began his theorizing actually began back in 1942 when he was a graduate student in particle physics at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. He was doing experiments at the cyclotron. And in terms of previously existing physical theory, this is part of a long lecture he gave me once on a road trip that came out of nowhere, but I want to repeat part of it for everybody here. And that is, he viewed the history of physics as the history of ever refining filters of measurement. So we started out in physics by doing the geometry of fields and crops and cannonballs and that kind of thing, large and visible objects. But then we began to dive into the invisible world. First of all, the world of chemistry, molecules interacting, and then atoms interacting, and then elementary particles composing matter interacting. And there we kind of began to cross the line between radiant energy and particles. And we've had some difficulty making that transition, bringing everything together mathematically. That's what he had worked on for so many years before he published his first paper on gravitation, which was in 1960. This was after a conversation with Richard Feynman at Caltech. Richard Feynman used to keep office hours, and my dad was down there on a business trip, and he dropped in with Feynman and had I think a 2-hour discussion with him. And Feynman really tried to punch holes in his theory. And when he couldn't do it, he encouraged my dad to publish. Now, in 1960, he published a paper with the American Journal of Astronautics and Aeronautics on the origin of the gravitational field. Of course, I was around at that time. I think I was 10 years old. And I remember how excited he was about that. And coincidentally, the US Air Force was doing a survey at the time of gravitation theories worldwide, because the Soviet Union was claiming to have an anti-gravity vehicle. And in my book, the top 10 UFO riddles, I cite the scientist who was talking about this at the time. He turned out to be a fraud. However, the Air Force was interested in my father's theory, which the author of the survey called the only theory that he had looked at worldwide since the time of Sir Isaac Newton that had a prayer of an engineering application. Now, at the time, my dad had no idea what that application might be, but he did want to work on it. He was thrilled, except that they told him it would be classified higher than the Manhattan Project. Now, my dad had been around the periphery of the Manhattan Project when it was on, and my mom actually worked on it, so did my uncle. And they had no great love of that level of secrecy. What he really wanted, and he told me this from the time I was 8 years old, was to open up the space frontier. And this could only be done, he felt, and it seems to be true now as it was back then, by eliminating the need for rockets, by controlling the gravitational force. If you could control gravity, you could reduce the need for hauling fuel into space or burning up all your fuel on your way out of the atmosphere. And you'd have plenty of fuel left over to maneuver out in space. You could also bring huge payloads up there. You could build factories in space. You could mine the asteroids. You could visit the planets without any difficulty at all, and much more, which I'll touch on later. But the Air Force apparently wanted to put this in the black vault, and he wasn't game for that at all. So he walked out of the meeting with an Air Force colonel at the Foreign Technology Division at Moffett Field, Ames Research and Development. And so he decided to go it on his own, and the head of the survey for the Air Force told him, your theory has about as much chance as a snowball in hell of getting through the door of any university in the world right now because of the dominance of general relativity. And I have to say that after my dad died, I went back to the university system, and I tried to just get an audience with somebody who would listen to me describe an experiment he did in 1994, which was strongly suggestive that he was correct. And I couldn't even get in the door. They would not speak to me. And of course, they wouldn't speak to him during his entire lifetime. And so from the time of, well, let me back up a bit. His idea for the technology based on his theory came about because of a UAP sighting. This UAP sighting, though, was in 1957. This was a UFO. They call them UFOs back then. UAP, of course, is a euphemism for UFO, but you don't have to talk about aliens when you're talking about UAPs. And you notice in the congressional hearings how circumspect they are about bringing up the topic of aliens. We don't know who's making these things, they say. Of course, whoever's making them has technology at least 1,000 years in advance of anything we've got. However, the propulsion system may not be quite that complicated, because this UFO was buzzing in 57, was buzzing a B-52 that was on a training mission, electronic countermeasures training mission over the Gulf of Mexico. And they had 3 hours to take readings off of this UFO. I don't know everything that they recorded, but enough of it was published in the Condon Committee report on UFOs. The final, this was case number 2. Case number 2 was deleted from the final Condon Committee report. They didn't want this out there, obviously, but somebody caught it and made a copy. And it said that this UFO, which was as big as a barn and running circles around the B-52, was emitting a pulsed microwave field in the 3 gigahertz range. And so my dad started thinking about that. What could they possibly be doing in terms of my theory? And that gave him the idea of going to a technical library in Long Beach, where he was working. And he found a book, which is online right now, called Dynamic Nuclear Orientation. It's by a professor from Berkeley named C.D. Jeffries. And it describes how you can set up this electrons in a paramagnetic material, such as aluminum, to spin along a single axis, and then you blast them from a right angle with a microwave pulse. They flip over, and because of their proximity to the nucleus of the aluminum, they transfer by angular momentum, and I mean magnetic moment, not the billiard ball kind of movement, but magnetic moment, to the nucleus, and that flips the nucleus. And then we come to what else it does in terms of his theory, which is it gives an orientation to the virtual processes that are associated with that nucleus. Virtual processes are they are below the, remember I talked about filters, they're below the level of things you can observe. However, they can be inferred, and they are used regularly in talking about black body radiation and that kind of thing. They're very transient. He did some calculations in his later paper, which I just happen to have right here, which put them at the range of 0.0011596 seconds. It's a thrilling page from the paper, which, sorry, you can't see it, but you can get it online, which is called, let's see, I want to get it right. This is AIAA-81-1608, Anti-Gravity with Present Technology, Implementation and Theoretical Foundation, 1981. Now, if he had $1 trillion idea, what was he doing publishing this paper in the proceedings of the 17th Joint Propulsion Conference at Colorado Springs, where Nikola Tesla, of course, did his experiments portentously, I hope, because I got to come to my disclaimer in a moment about how certain we are that this is all true. Why would he publish it? He had a patent pending at the time, and he was sure it was going to be accepted because he was dealing with nothing but known processes. He didn't have a device handy, but his patent attorney told him no question is going to be accepted, except they didn't accept it. They turned it down, and they never said why. I have some speculation about why they turned it down, but I don't want to spend a lot of time speculating. Let's just say maybe it bumped up against another patent that was secret. So he had made the mistake of exposing his technology to the world in 1981. And at that point, the whole world could have taken what he had put in that paper and started working on it, if, of course, some university would accept it. But we don't know if they did that. And it could be that they did. That could explain the UAP phenomenon if the metallurgy wasn't so advanced, as well as the gravity control. But in 1981, he began his quest for backing. And by the time I was helping in Silicon Valley, helping him find investors in Silicon Valley, it was a very heavy lift to get people to listen to me, because as soon as the word anti-gravity came up, people would, raise both eyebrows and look at you sideways and try to look for the nearest exit. Nobody wanted to hear about anti-gravity, but there wasn't anything else to call it. Well, he decided to call it gravity control because of the negative of word anti-gravity, the negative effects. And in 2012, when he died, he had only managed to put on one experiment in 1994. And that is in my book, Gravity Control with Present Technology, which is his title, the title for his paper, but turned into a book. And I think I have a copy of it here somewhere or behind me. Yes, this is the book. It's on Amazon. And it has the record of the experiment. These are charts that show the loss of weight in a sample of aluminum coated with particles, 1 micron particles of iron. Those are sort of a booster to get the magnetic force to applied to the nuclei to be stronger. They're a primer, so to speak. So with the success of that experiment, he thought he kind of had it in the bag, but nothing happened. In 2012, I started looking again for funds to fund the experiments. Haven't come up with anything. And that's where things stand today, except for Mark. Mark has decided to repeat the 1994 experiment with improvements because there were flaws in the 1994 experiment. And if Mark is successful, I suspect that the world will be a path to his door. And that pretty much brings us up to date on the technology. I haven't described exactly how it works, but it's analogous to a cryogenic pump. This cryogenic process has been known since 1920s. It can achieve temperatures of close to absolute zero. Now, by analogy, we should be able to completely negate the gravitational field using dynamic nuclear orientation. And to describe how it works very briefly, nuclei become oriented. It's the virtual process field that they're surrounded by that has to break up this order and turn it into disorder. It's called an order-disorder transformation, and it lowers the mean energy in the field because the work that is done to disorient the nuclei after the microwave field is turned off costs the gravitational field energy. And you simply repeat this over and over again at a high rate of speed, and you can eventually decrease the gravitational field by increments down, 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 down. And if you remember the charts, they had a sawtooth pattern like this. The weight of the object goes up slightly, and then it descends into a valley. And then when the second pulse occurs, it goes up slightly. And then when you shut off the microwave pulse, it drops further. And if you were to repeat this, many, many times, you'd eventually turn the weight of the object into zero, as well as the inertial field of the object. So it would have no inertia and it would have no weight at all. You know that inertia and mass are directly related, and so is the gravitational attraction of the Earth. Everything is related. Einstein had his explanation. This is a much more mechanical explanation in terms of known physics. And I guess that's my introduction to what my dad was all about. And I've been viewing the congressional hearings with a lot of interest because the implications of the technology are that this is exactly what the UAPs are using to fly around, based especially on that 1957 sighting, and in which this pulsed microwave field was being emitted from this object. Also, people who've witnessed UFOs on the ground have been apparently burned by microwave fields. And so here's the explanation, but it's also the explanation for a lot of weird things that UAPs do, like instantaneous accelerations that should kill the occupants, if you understand how G forces work, and I'm sure that everybody here does. the occupants should be turned into strawberry jam by the accelerations that these things undergo. In fact, the object itself should be blown apart, but it isn't. So they're controlling inertia and they're controlling gravity. And this gives an explanation. Another feature that is seen frequently is the falling leaf pattern. And this is also explained. The whole crop circle phenomenon can be explained using the same technology. So crop circles, instead of being seen as magical, they can be seen as a very efficient way to communicate with Earthlings without getting out of your interstellar craft or your shuttlecraft, whatever kind of craft they're using. And some other things such as faster than light travel fall out from the theory. For example, according to the special theory of relativity, which is incorporated into this theory, as you approach the speed of light, the mass of the object you're flying in and yourself increases to infinity. But if your object has no mass and no inertia, you can pass through the barrier of the speed of light with no trouble at all. I once asked my dad, how many times faster than the speed of light could you go? And he said, how many do you want? And I said, well, 10. He said, why not 100? So warp drive essentially is easily done with this technology. And with that, I'm welcoming any questions you might have, and I'm ready to answer them.
Wonderful. David, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let me do this. That was a relatively short presentation. I want to put this thing on gallery view. Everyone, please give David Alzofon an enormous hand. David, thank you so much for coming back and giving kind of a refresher on your work and your father's work.